welcome back to another episode where I talk about things on this Wednesday, October 8th, 2025 in northern Israel. And as you can hear, the birds have what to say. There's some Bitcoins for the birds. What do you have to say about that? Those are some significant habitats they have made in the trees. In case you're wondering, these kind of birds in Hebrew are called Dra. And the Draga birds come out at around shortly before sunset, dusk, and begin their singing as they ready for their feasting and whatnot. And they can be quite loud, actually. Sometimes you have areas where there's many of them and they make quite a lot of noise. Personally, I like the noise, usually. But they do sometimes cause some issues for certain people in certain places and times. But why did I say Bitcoin is for the birds? Well, apart from that little cute video right there of the bird chirping along, my expression is meant to be in jest. It is meant to be a foil to the common expressions of doubt that is met by Bitcoiners who hear constantly that Bitcoin is a scam, Bitcoin is for criminals, Bitcoin is only used for illegal activity, and all this kind of other tropes that we have heard for many, many years. Well, Bitcoin's only 16 years old, but for as long as Bitcoin has been around. People who have denied it, that it has any functionality or any value, and to this day pretend that that's the case. Hello there, Yosef. If Bitcoin has no value, then why is it 16 years in the running with a return on investment of over 20 billion%? Not like it just spiked up one day and just is going to crash to zero. No, it has grown to that value over time as more people learned about it and understood that there's something there. Yosef, I can't read that. The print is very small. But anyway, shalom to you. Hi. Hello. Hi, Metlar. That name reminds me of somebody. Maybe it's you. Maybe it's not. I don't think it is, but anyway. So Bitcoin has been accused, again, since time immemorial in Bitcoin's existence, which is a whopping 16 years and more, has been accused of being a useless, device that has no value because it has no use case. It doesn't produce anything. The people that say that usually are holding big bags of fiat currency or gold or both. Have you noticed that? Have you ever wondered why somebody, or stocks, right? Have you ever wondered why people whose wealth is already in a pre-existing system, like fiat currency, which literally produces nothing, would say critical things of Bitcoin when they are already old people who don't need to necessarily learn anything new to spend the rest of their days in absolute wealth? Has it ever occurred to you why people like Warren Buffett or his former business partner before he died, Charlie Munger, he was why they were both critical of Bitcoin? Does it occur to you why people like Peter Schiff, or Peter Schill, or what are you going to call him, are always shilling things like gold, even though he himself holds apparently less than 5% of his portfolio in gold, reportedly, and apparently does have some Bitcoin despite his denials of it. And we know his son certainly has a bunch of Bitcoin. Does it ever occur to you why he would be talking trash about Bitcoin? Maybe he's butthurt that he didn't get in at the super lows of like $1, $5, whatever, $10, right? And now he just doesn't know how to handle it very well, or that he's making a lot of money by trash talking it at various Bitcoin events around the world since many years. That's how he stays relevant, is trash talking that. That way people will pay attention to what he says about other stuff. Right? Like, don't get it twisted. He, once upon a time, went as a banker, a Wall Street banker, with his camera down to Occupy Plaza or whatever they called that park temporarily in downtown Manhattan near Wall Street. And we're not far from there. And was interviewing people who were holding up all kinds of protest placards that they were basically against the top 1% in the financial system in America. And he was actually on the side of the people against the system. If you watch his interviews, you'll see, the people he was talking to, the people that thought that because he was a Wall Street guy, that he would be totally against them. But actually, he was not. He was actually standing with them on many issues. And you could hear what he was saying was very much in line to what people who were Bitcoiners were saying at the time. And, OGs who are still in it still say to this day. People need a mechanism to get out from the system, which is broken and corrupted. And that's exactly what Satoshi gave people when he made the protocol and then gave it away. Right? And we don't see in the 15 years or so, 14 years or so since those Occupy protest days, which by the way was done by an ad company. If you don't know that, it's done by an advertising company. We don't see that the system has actually changed to benefit people. We see that exactly what people were saying back then was going to happen has been happening increasingly. The system keeps getting a stronger grip and keeps choking the people more and more. And people are suffering more and more as a result. Prices of things keep going up because they do, because the dollar keeps getting printed in huge amounts. But instead of distributing that liquid to all of the different people that could actually benefit from it, it is distributed only to the people who already have all the money and don't need another penny. And they get to decide if they want to lend any out to anybody else at exorbitant lender rates. Those are not just banks, but secondary loan companies, often called loan sharks or whatever you want to call them, alternative money lender sources. Okay. Many of whom, by the way, are wonderful companies, actually, even though they're called loan sharks. Okay. They're actually run by really decent people, and they're just there to help people. And yeah, they make a bit of a profit, and they probably make more than a bank would make, but they're taking a bit more risk by lending people to money who can't get a loan from a bank for whatever reason. So, of course, they take a bit more of a margin for profit, etc. That's up for debate whether those companies are predatory or not. I would argue that many of them are not. Some of them clearly are. Those who definitely are and are taken to task for it, some companies have faced stiff penalties over the years, but for the most part, a lot of these companies operate within the legal boundaries, and that's why they continue to operate. And the point is, those companies, as well as traditional banks, as well as the central banks to print the money and give it to the traditional banks and other wealthy industrialists, they are increasingly in control of the money pipe. And the average worker is not. And one of the things about the Bitcoin protocol, which I think is great, but is not perfect, is not just the ability to send values between people, because to me that's the most important thing about it. Like you can transmit values to somebody without a middleman. That is by far to me its greatest characteristic, far more than the price of it. The ability to escape the financial system by way of being able to transmit values peer to peer. That is another aspect of its incredible protocol. However, like I said, it's not perfect. And one of the ways I believe it's not perfect is that Bitcoin, because it is fully open, allows itself to be manipulated in a sense. I'm not talking about price action, although that's a different story. It allows itself to be taken over by those who have the most assets, which is inevitable when you have an open system that lets anybody buy in. But there are other projects that have taken this into consideration, and you can trash talk them all you want. But there are other cryptocurrencies that have done things like what Hex did, which was a crypto created by Richard Hart some years ago. And he made a system where if you had a whale wallet, meaning if you had over a certain amount of Bitcoins or Ethereum or whatever in your wallet, then you could not buy or claim free Hex, for example. Right? You had to buy it on the open market, etc. Now, what that allowed the project to do was to distribute the token to regular people first, to make sure that people who are not already whales could get a nice share of that project. And you can tell me, oh, I don't want to hear it was a scam or whatever. To me, it wasn't a scam. The project still exists, actually. And sure, it's worth far less than it was at the all-time highs, but that all-time highs to date, anyway. But you can believe it was a scam if you want. You can believe the guy's a bad guy if you want. Whatever. I think differently than that. I think actually he's a really smart guy when it comes to the broader topics that he's dealing with, specifically with regards to crypto and marketing, and how to build a brand in the crypto space and get the word out about it and get people to adopt it, etc. He's done a pretty good job of that with Hex. And then, arguable about whatever you want to do. Talk about with their respective Pulse and all the other things, all the other versions and iterations since then. But I would say still that project, even though that wasn't perfect either, at least made an attempt to keep whales out of the ecosystem, at least initially. Because it was inevitable in there too as well. Because if you have an open market system, then of course wealthy people are going to buy in. That is inevitable. Right? Like in Bitcoin. Bitcoin at first was held by regular people. It wasn't held by all millionaires and billionaires. Right? It was held by regular computer people or computer users, cypherpunks mostly, people who were into that topic. In the early days. Nobody cared about us. Nobody thought anything of us. And they laughed at us. They ignored us and they laughed at us. And eventually they fought us. And eventually we won. And it was no surprise to me that whales would eventually take over the space. It's just that the way the protocol was built allowed for that to happen extremely rapidly. Now, you could argue that would have happened at about the same pace anyway, even if there had been a no whales rule in some way, shape, or form from the outset, right? Or if they capped, for example, the number of Bitcoins that a person one organization could mine, or if they'd prevented the use of ASIC miners, right? If they made the protocol ASIC resistant, so that anybody with any computer or laptop could mine it even today, instead of relying on massive corporations to do all the mining with tens of millions or hundreds of millions of dollars worth of miners invested in their mining farms. But that's neither here nor there, because what's done is done. You can't change that, right? You can't change it with Litecoin, and you can't change it with anything that's already on the market. It's already been launched and already has some level of adoption, and that big companies are putting investments into to mine. Now you could say, well, hang on a second, Litecoin is not nearly as heavily owned by whales. That's true. That's one of the reasons I keep saying, people, wake up and smell the coffee. Bitcoin is about 1,000 times more expensive than Litecoin. And there's only 4 times as many Litecoin as there are Bitcoin in terms of max cap supply. And Litecoin has all of the same technical characteristics as Bitcoin. Right? It's the same protocol, has all the same features. So when people realize that, and it's still mostly held by retail, right? But there are whales buying it up. Look at Grayscale. Grayscale has been buying up not insignificant numbers of Litecoin in recent months. There's a reason for that. They are very fond of owning an asset that they realize has a significant probability of a much higher return on investment than it has currently delivered, because of the mere fact that Bitcoin has already taken off and hit 20 billion%, and Litecoin is still down at around 1,000th of the price of a Bitcoin, whereas back in 2017 at the high, when Bitcoin was roughly for the first time, Litecoin went up like $400. So whatever that is, a couple percent of the Bitcoin price. So certainly it had a higher value compared to Bitcoin then than it does now. And now we see that it's at around 1,000th of Bitcoin, and it has been that way for a long time. And yet there is a supply shock on Litecoin that will happen, just like there is one happening on Bitcoin. When will that supply shock happen on Litecoin? It doesn't really matter, but it will. I'll tell you when it will happen. Can't give you an exact date for it, but I'll tell you when it will happen. I've already said it in this video. It's going to happen when people realize, hot dang, there really isn't any Bitcoin left. Not much. And certainly the big buyers are going to realize, wait, we can't just go and buy another 30,000 Bitcoins today on the market, because there's not 30,000 Bitcoins on the market that are easily available. That's definitely happening. We're seeing that. Have you noticed how in recent days and weeks you haven't seen the exact weekly purchase receipts from Michael Saylor about strategy? They're taking a little bit longer to happen. And you could say, well, it's because it's at an all-time high. He doesn't want to buy at the all-time highs. Well, if that's true, then he's not very honest, is he? Because how many times has he said over the last 5 years since he started buying Bitcoin, I will always buy Bitcoin at all-time highs. I'll keep buying at all-time highs. I'm never going to stop buying at all-time highs. Well, it looks like he has stopped buying at all-time highs, at least for now, because he hasn't posted messages about how much Bitcoin he's been buying in recent weeks on a regular. Like, he used to do this once a week for some period, for a good number of months. Right? He was posting how much they were buying, etc. And they still do. Whenever they make a purchase, they announce it. But the number of announcements they're making per month or per quarter is starting to trail off. And again, it's not a criticism of Michael Saylor or anything like that. It's just a reflection of the fact that there's just not as much Bitcoin for his company to buy, which is why he can't release a message every week that says we bought another 3,000 Bitcoin or 5,000 or 10,000 Bitcoin, right? Sometimes they buy a few hundred, which is no chump change and nothing to laugh at. And from my point of view, I would like it if they would stop altogether, because I don't see the ethos of Bitcoin in the acts of acquiring all of the Bitcoin by a very small number of holders. I see that as the anti-ethos of Bitcoin. Those are the same people, the ones that are making all the big buys now with all the money. They're the same people that 5 and 10 years ago would not stop trash talking Bitcoin, including Michael Saylor himself, who said it was for the birds, effectively. He had other words for it, which were not so nice. He didn't believe it had any value. He believed it was garbage. He thought it would go the way of the dodo soon enough, just as soon as some kind of fad would end. Right? He thought it was just some kind of a silly trend that would just eventually end in relative short order. And he, like so many other experts in their field, were wrong. It has not just gone away. Just like the people who said email would go away 30 years ago. There's still email. People still use email. It may be full of junk, but people still use it. And that's normal for any industry in its initial years as an industry adopting, being adopted by people, etc. You're going to have a significant initial growth period. Things are going to slow down a little bit. You're going to get a lot of more growth as grifters and shillers get on board, scammers and spammers, etc. And then eventually that'll fade off too, and the technology will either fade away if people are overwhelmed by the garbage, or it will continue after adapting to the new reality, like having all these filters set up and only using email for work-related stuff and as little as possible for personal stuff, etc. Right? But to this day, email exists, email lists exist, and arguably, email lists remain the number one driver of determining your e-business's potential value. Right? The size of your email subscriber list is still the number one determinant of your digital business value when it comes to, what is your value? How do you value your business? Well, you can measure it by the number of subscribers and engagements that they have and purchases they make, etc. But it all comes down to the number of subscribers first, because if you don't have any subscribers, it's going to be hard to get the word out. Whereas if you have millions of subscribers, by email, then it's much easier to message people and get the word out about what you're doing. And that's why email is considered still to this day an incredibly valuable asset for digital business, apart from the basic communications purposes that it serves intra-office and inter-office between businesses and clients, etc. The same thing goes for Bitcoin, right? Bitcoin has gone through the initial growth stage of the earliest days. Most of it has already been mined. A lot of people who wanted some in the early days got a bunch, if they could figure out a way to get it. And then a lot of shillers and grifters and scammers and spammers came on board and started making it annoying, in the sense of, like, you couldn't trust any emails you got that mentioned it because it was likely to contain some bad link. You can't trust messages on social media that promise you anything about the Bitcoins. You can't, there's a lack of trust there. So people started to get annoyed by it and started to fade on Bitcoin in the same way they started to fade on email. They said, oh, this is just annoying. I don't see the purpose of this. I'm going to go back to my old ways of doing things and forget about this digital money stuff. But now that Bitcoin is once again at all-time highs, we're seeing the normies once again glom on to the latest trend, jump on the bandwagon, and guess what's going to happen? They're going to get wrecked. because they're jumping on at all-time highs. And even if it goes up from here to 200K or 250K or some crazy number, they're going to stay in it when they should get out of it. They're not going to take their profits. Okay? And if they're buying in right now and it dips, they're going to hold on. They're just going to keep holding on. Right? Like I'm talking about people who are new to it or people that are recently coming back to it. They're going to not take their profits. And that is going to cost them their profits. That's going to cost them money. It's going to cause them heartache and pain. And you should not be surprised by that because it is the most normal thing that happens in every market. We see this happening time and time again. That people make foolish investment decisions based on basically bad information. Right? So the same people that said Bitcoin is for the birds, can you hear there's more birds here? Same people that said that Bitcoin is for the birds, when they started getting annoyed by its use case and by all the shillers and grifters and scammers and spammers, all the malfeasance in the space, they left a bad taste in their mouth the last time they lost money, and then they waited too long to get back in again. Too many of them are going to take positions they can't afford to lose, and they're going to lose them. Pure and simple. They're going to lose them for very simple reasons, right? Because at the end of the day, they're going to come back, get it at the highs again, at or where they got out, which is exactly what they're doing right now. They're going to buy and pray. While all the people who already have been holding since it was 3K or 5K or 10K or 15K, we've all been holding and holding. For what purpose? In many cases, for the precise purpose of selling to those people when it reaches all-time highs. And that is where we're at. So yes, there are a lot of people selling right now. They're selling because there are a lot of buyers in the retail space who are imagining that it's going to go to 250,000 now because it breached all-time highs again. Well, that is a problem that people who are new to investing or trading will typically make. They will always buy at the highs and sell at the lows. It's a natural element of any given marketplace. We see it constantly. There is no special time when traders and investors don't do this on the whole as retail investors and retail traders. They will continually make that decision to buy at the high and sell at the low because, again, they're misled by poor quality information. They're not using the highest quality available information. They don't even know that it exists. They don't even know what that high quality information is. Therefore, they have no idea what to even look for because it hasn't occurred to them that there could be a better way to get things done like that. Because the only information they've ever had about the markets is misleading information, deceptive information that's designed to make them fail. It's never occurred to them that the market is actually not a level playing field and that the people who have the most amount of beans in the biggest bags and the fastest computers, fastest connections to the market exchanges, they have technical, qualitative, and quantitative advantages that the average person does not have. So that's what makes the entire market essentially not a level playing field. It is completely rigged. Now, when I say it's completely rigged, does that mean that you can't enter a trade and win? No, of course it doesn't mean that. Yes, there is an open market in a sense. Anyone can enter trades and exit trades, and you can take your profit. But the way information flows in the market, the way tropes are disseminated and believed by people who don't have access to better information just because they haven't, not because they can't access it. You could go on Google, search for, you know, a better way to trade using volatility or entropy or both. You'll surely come up with the trading group that I co-founded, Alpha Trading, right? But it doesn't occur to people to do that because they have no way of knowing. And the systems that flow the information will never put that information in front of them, for the most part, unless they specifically search for something about it and find it in some way, or most of the time, randomly stumble upon it pretty much by accident, right? Now, I can tell you that in our, really tiny little community of traders and investors at Alpha Trading, the overwhelming majority of people came in through those two routes, right? It wasn't through word of mouth. Yes, there was some word of mouth, but that wasn't the main thing, right? It was mostly people, and to this day it still is mostly people who either specifically searched for something related to what we do, so they stumbled across our videos that way, or our group, or our webpage, whatever, or they randomly stumbled into it, like without even searching for it. They just were watching videos on YouTube or Rumble or TradingView or wherever. And we're talking like extremely minimal amounts of people, like compared to the many tens of millions of people who trade around the world and who trade crypto around the world. So there's a reason for that, again, because systems like this very video platform that we're on and others, and so other social media apps, make a great effort to effectively silence voices like Alpha Tradings, which want to seriously just share good information with people and show people how the market actually works. And they're denied that by the very organizations that pretend to be open platforms where anybody can find any information. It's not really true. You can't really find any information if you go searching on those platforms because they're not actually open. They may once upon a time have had openness in mind. Maybe they even attempted it. But eventually, they've all changed a long time ago already. They're very much closed platforms. And if you aren't aware of what to look for and how to look for it, you're not going to find what you think you might find. Right? You need to have very specific information that you want to find, and you need to know how to look for it and not give up your search too easily, because it is very easy to be misled about the things you're looking for. And that's one of the reasons that information, I say, is well controlled and is not easily accessible to the masses. Because again, the gatekeepers of information for certain companies and industries really do have a very simple agenda in all cases, which is to deliver value to their shareholders. And that means increased value per share over time. And that includes blocking off people as much as possible from knowledge about what they do. Knowledge, right? From blocking off access to information about what it is that they do and how they do it. So anybody that offers information about how to do something differently is a threat, even if unintentionally. They are a threat to the financial fortunes of companies that are already well entrenched and view themselves as entitled or just want to keep that control as much as possible in their control. So that's exactly why you have to view the market with skepticism in order to not essentially fall victim to the information censorship. So, anyway, that's my little talk for now about that topic. Bitcoin is for the birds, but only if you believe in tropes. As far as I'm concerned, it is still a remarkable asset, and yes, it will eventually have so many more controls over the information that people will be shocked by how not free it will appear to be, because they are using a system that allows their Bitcoin to be controlled by others. But if you maintain your Bitcoin outside of that, in the free zone, where you still have the ability to control your Bitcoin yourself, well, in that case, you still have a measure of liberty that is afforded to Bitcoin holders that is not so prevalent in the traditional system. Anyway, that's going to do it for now. I'll talk to you guys later. I wish you all a happy and wonderful day and evening and night, whatever it is where you are, whatever time it is, whatever day it is. As I said at the outset, I hope you're doing good and doing well. And that's going to do it for now. Talk to you guys later. Peace.